allowing me to lead this particular study group. Before I get started on the configuration section strategies, does anyone have any general questions for me? Don't be shy.
Anthony, do you know if the SDM templates, is that going to be something that's covered in CCIE like it is on the new CCNP switch and TCAM?
I really can't see that in our CCIE.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I would not make it a primary concern.
Mm.
In fact, it's one of the things that we're going to talk about in this session, actually. They reserve the right to ask you anything, and so that might initially freak you out, but I'm going to deal with that today. Okay, so yeah, so they flat out tell you, hey, here's this 20-page blueprint of stuff we're going to ask you, and then they say, oh, in addition, we can ask you anything else we feel like. You know, so a lot of students will read that and go, well, you know, that's insane. How can I possibly prepare? But I'll let you in on a tip when we get started here about that. Any other questions before we get started with the official content that I have to share with you? Paul, I love that you saw the glow-in-the-dark stars. Yeah, so this my home office used to be my daughter's bedroom, so I left them up because they're cool, man.
I thought maybe you just got tired and you turned out the lights and watched the stars for a while.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, now that I think about it, I've never done that since this has been my office. I'll have to work late one night and check out the stars. So let's talk about the configuration section strategies. And after every single one of these, I'll pause to see if you guys have any questions, because they'll probably jog some questions. I didn't have time to create some fancy PowerPoint or anything like that. So what I'll do is I'll get these to Katie immediately following the study session and make sure that she gets them out to you guys whatever's the best way. Katie, obviously we should probably just send them out to the entire Cisco group or something.
Sounds good, thanks.
So I kind of put these in somewhat order that you would want to tackle them as you hit the config section of your CCIE. So one of the first things that you're going to do is you're going to read carefully the do's and don'ts for the configuration section. Can someone give me an example of what a don't would be on the do's and don'ts list for the config section? So there's these about 10 rules for the config section. Anyone have a guess at what one of those rules would be? Paul says spend too much time on any one task. No, that's a great idea, but that's more strategic, and they're not helping you with strategy in these do's and don'ts.
So these do's and don'ts are not something official that comes from Cisco. These are these sort of strategic.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Let me clarify. So you get to the config section on your test and you click a button, and it will present to you, before you can start the config section, it presents to you a list of, actually I said do's and don'ts. Yeah, there are do's on there now that I think about it. So there's things you have to do and things you can't do in the config section. So they are official, they are from Cisco, and they present these to you before you can start configuring. What do you think might be a don't do that's on that list? Any ideas? Okay, well, I'll give you a cheat. Yeah, they actually, the proctor is going to tell you not to cheat, and then that's not on the do's and don'ts. Let me give you one. Static routes. That's right, Paul, certain commands. Excellent. So they're going to tell you that you cannot use static routes unless specified in the task otherwise, unless the task makes an exception. Okay? So you need to read these do's and don'ts carefully. What ends up happening is a lot of candidates will take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 times to pass the lab. So they actually have the do's and don'ts memorized. They don't even bother to read them anymore because they know that list of like 8 things. So the first thing I need you to do if you're new to this experience is I need you to read that list carefully. So that's going to tell you things like you have to save your configurations. Don't lock the proctor out of the equipment. They'll fail you right away. If the proctor tries to get into your equipment and you've somehow locked them out with some enable password or maybe you have some debug running that's interfering with their ability to grade you, they immediately fail you. Even if they know how to circumvent that, they're going to fail you. So this do's and don'ts is very important. One that's definitely going to be there is you can't use static routes unless otherwise, notified that you can. Now, why do they have that one? Well, clearly you could just say, to heck with this OSPF scenario, I'm just going to drop in static routes and I'm going to skip the OSPF section. And they don't want you to be able to skip major dynamic routing protocols. All right. After that, after you go through those do's and don'ts, what I want you to do is I want you to read the entire configuration section. Now, I speed read it. I'm not reading it super carefully. I'm not going to take 45 minutes in this, but I'm going to look it over. Because what you want to see is you just want to see an overall picture of what you're going to be doing throughout the day. And you also want to start thinking about stuff that might break other stuff. Let me give you an example. Let's say I look it over and I see in the security section, they're going to have me do like an ACL-based or a zone-based firewall type situation on one of the devices. Well, that's obviously going to break things. Things that you probably have working are now going to be broken. Security features are famous for breaking things in your lab. So you look at the entire lab, you read it over, and you start kind of getting a picture of what things may interact badly with what other things. Now, if you're a nervous test taker, please resist the urge to panic. One of the things about reading the exam ahead that always concerns me with my students is they will read it ahead and they will see some task that they're not strong in and they'll have this urge to panic. And just absolutely don't do that. Just, take a deep breath, read through the lab, and avoid the urge to panic. You are probably going to see things that you struggle with. I mean, it's inevitable. There's going to be some things there that you feel somewhat weak in compared to the other things you're seeing. Just don't panic. It's going to be fine. So, do's and don'ts, read the entire config section first, and then the third thing that we're going to do is we have to go to the devices now quickly, and we have to make sure that the initial configuration's loaded properly and that you can get in. Remember, just like the troubleshooting section, if you walk up to the proctor and there's like 2 hours left of your day, and you say to him, I can't get into switch 6, he's going to say, why did you just bring this up now? And he's probably going to let you fail, he or she. Okay, so you need to be alerting them about any equipment problems early or you're in big trouble. So do's and don'ts, read the entire section, and then check the configs on a couple of devices. Any questions at this point? And again, don't be shy, ask anything. All right. The next strategic thing that I'm going to want you to consider, remember, the strategies I'm giving you are strategies that worked for me. These may not be what you end up doing. They're just strategic things that I did to be able to pass. So you can take them or leave them. There is no one-size-fits-all with CCIE. But what I then did was I grabbed a sheet of paper that they give you, an 8.5 by 11 sheet, and I wrote at the top, STT. This is my skipped task tracker. What I'm going to record on this sheet of paper is any lab task that I skip completely or that I attempt to do but can't. So I'm trying it and I'm running into problems. It gets recorded on this sheet. The task ID number, the name of the task, any notes that I might want to jot down, like about what I'm struggling with, the point value, and then I write down, is it core or non-core? I would just put a C or an N. Now this is critical. What is my definition of a core versus a non-core task? Does anybody know? I've mentioned this a lot of times. Maybe you've heard me mention it. Does anyone know what I consider a core versus a non-core task? Okay. Paul got it. Excellent. So a core task is any task that if you skip, you will lose other points. Okay? A non-core task, you can skip and it will affect no other points in your lab. Anybody see a big difference between those two things? There is a massive difference between those two things. Oftentimes, a core task is going to fail you if you skip. A non-core task, you can skip and pass. There was a task when I passed that I was like, wow, congratulations, Cisco. I have no idea how you do that. I didn't even know it was possible on a router. And I looked it up in the doc CD, I worked with it, and after about 15 minutes I said, you know what, good for you, Cisco, congrats. And I skipped it. I had no worries about failing the lab. It was clearly a non-core task. So on my skip task tracker, obviously I am noting whether it is core or non-core, because that's a huge piece of information for me to know. When I'm coming back to the skip task tracker at the end of the day, for example, I'm going to attack all of the core tasks that I was struggling with, because they could end up failing me in the lab exam. When you have a task, here's another strategic idea I have for you. When you have a task and it's a large, complex task, what you do is you break that task up into subtasks and you configure and verify, configure and verify. You see, this lab, when you first look at it, is like, oh my gosh, how am I going to be able to do this in 6 hours? The config portion I'm talking about here. But here's the deal. If you break it up into small, manageable chunks, nothing really becomes that hard. The lab looks hard from an overview, but once you start going in and doing each task and breaking each task up, it's really just a collection of relatively simple things. So that's the way I want you to look at this exam. So be ready to break tasks up. Let me give you an example. They say to you, configure OSPF per the diagram. And you look at the diagram, and there's like 4 areas, and there's a virtual link that's required. They didn't say that it's required, but you can see that you're going to need a virtual link, and there's authentication, and there's all this stuff, and you may have the surge to panic. Well, no, don't panic. Just break that up into its parts. I'm going to get the backbone set up and authenticated and verified, and then I'm going to work on this area, and then I'm going to build my virtual link. You break everything down into subtasks. The scratch paper is really going to help you here. You can literally write out the subtasks if you want on scratch paper and check them off as you verify. Now, we break up the complex tasks into subtasks and we verify them. Anytime you make a change in your lab that could break something else, you're going to have to be ready to re-verify. So don't forget, we should be in the mode of re-verification. There is a tickle script, a TCL script, that I love to use in the lab exam. What you do is you grab the IP addresses off the devices and you put them into this tickle script in Notepad, and when you're all done with your lab exam, you can run that tickle script from a few of the devices strategically, and you can ensure that you have connectivity still. So what a great way to do a final verification before you submit your lab for grading. Another great command, speaking of verification, is debug IP routing. Debug IP routing is awesome for your configuration section. In fact, go ahead and just visit all your routers and multi-layer switches and drop it in. And now, if you do something to break something, you're going to go over to a router and you're going to see debug IP routing output that says X route is gone, Y route is gone, Z route is gone. And you're going to get immediate knowledge that you just broke something. Routes are disappearing. Turn off all debugging before you submit for grading. So even though that debug is going to be harmless when you've got everything stable and happy for submission, just go ahead as a best practice and turn off all debugging. The proctors aren't going to want to see any debugging on when you submit. Remember, you have a 2-hour troubleshooting section, but there could be troubleshooting in your config section. In fact, if they tell you something like, configure OSPF over here and redistribute it mutually with EIGRP, and by the way, we configured the EIGRP for you, well then immediately you better be ready to troubleshoot. If they've done anything for you in the configuration section, it is probably broken to get you to do even more troubleshooting. So please be ready to troubleshoot in the config section. Now, you have to save your configurations prior to submission for grading. How did I handle that? Every single time I do a task or subtask, remember I break things up into subtasks, every time I do a subtask and I verify it, I save. I just type WR or do WR if I'm in a config mode. So at the end of the day, sure, I went to every device and saved, but I didn't have to, because after every verified success, I saved. This is a great strategy because if you were to run out of time, you could just go ahead and safely submit, and you know at least all the work that you've done is saved. Do not make any drastic configuration changes in the last half hour. So you would not want to like say, all right, let's see, I got 30 minutes left. I'm going to go ahead and drop in a zone-based firewall right here because I think that's what they need me to do. You would potentially break so much stuff, and you've only got 30 minutes left, you wouldn't have time to repair. That last 30 minutes should not be for anything drastic. What I think will happen to you in the last 30 minutes is you're just going to be going to your skip task tracker, looking at your non-core things that you skipped, and just trying to solve those non-core things. That's what you would be doing typically in your last half hour. Many of you are going to be so good at this that you just leave. Okay, you just thank the proctor and leave 30 minutes early. I did not leave early, but I was done early. And I just sat there and I just was, quite frankly, I just sat there and went back and re-verified. I had about, I think I looked up at the clock and there was like an hour left. And I am slow. I am super slow when it comes to configuring. So I was stunned. And I'm like, wow, I got an hour left. All right, let me just go and start from the beginning and re-verify everything. I was not confident enough to leave early. I paid so much money for the experience, I'm staying there the full time. Now, the last strategic tip that I want to give you is the documentation CD. And again, I know I talked about a lot of stuff. I'll get this list to Katie so she can get it out to you. The documentation CD. They're providing you with access to the documentation, and that's all the answers. Do you ever think about that? They're giving you all the answers. This is an open book test. I remember walking up to the proctor. It was after my third failure, and I said, he's become a good friend of mine, actually. His name's Howard. He used to be the proctor at Research Triangle Park. I said, Howard, this test is asinine. And he said, what do you mean, Anthony? And I said, you're having me configure like 12 hours worth of stuff in 8 hours. I mean, I would never try and configure this fast at a customer site. Why are you doing this to me? And he laughed and he said, we're doing this to you because we're giving you all the answers. And I smiled and said, oh my gosh, that's technically right. So the idea behind this is you're going to be lightning fast at all of the basics, right? Like you configure and verify all of the basics of OSPF like in blinding speed. You're a machine. And then you reserve time to look up in the doc CD the weird, crazy stuff that is not the basics about OSPF. There may be some new feature introduced with OSPF that you've never even heard of. You're reading it and you're like, wow, OSPF can do that? Sure enough, that is tucked away in the documentation CD, and you can go and find that and get those points under one condition, that you know how to use the documentation CD. So if you want to ensure that you pass, something else that you need to do strategically is master the documentation CD. If I asked you right now to find me the IPv6 tunnel types and their configurations in the doc CD, I would expect you to be able to do that for me in under 30 seconds. If you can't, I'm not saying you're going to fail the lab, I'm just saying that you will not be able to acquire some of the points. You will not be able to acquire some of the points. Someone just pasted it in the chat. That is great work. You won't be able to achieve the points that you could have achieved. You might miss some points. Now, by the way, you can't use Google. So if that link that was just pasted in was the result of a Google search, you cheated. All you can use is the intro navigation page of the documentation. And you can only use the one link. I believe it starts with the word products. So there's certain parts of the documentation you can't go to. You can start at the products word, and you can go anywhere from there. All right. So that's the strategic recommendations that I have for you today. I now want to answer any of the questions. I'm sure you have some questions. And remember, this is not, you know, I think CCIEs tend to not ask a lot of questions because they're supposed to be, you know, CCIE students. Whoa, I'm the top of the food chain here, and I can't have a question. But please ask anything, and no one's going to judge you for it. Okay, so we have a question. Cisco Viral, 32 gigs of RAM really needed? No way. No way. No. In Cisco Viral, you need 8 gigs of RAM on your box, but keep in mind that'll allow you to use like 4 virtualized devices effectively. Okay? So, but now initially you're like, oh, well that sucks, but wait a minute. You can practice just about everything you could think of on 4 virtual devices. I mean, can you practice a full lab? No. But I wouldn't use Viral to practice a full lab anyways. I'm going to go ahead and for $99 rent a practice lab that's graded for me. So Viral, awesome. You could have 8 gig. You'll have a couple of virtual devices that you can utilize to practice the technologies just fine. You go to 16 gigs, you have like 8 devices you're playing with, maybe 10, I don't know. The exact numbers, I can get you the exact numbers if you want them. You go to 32 gigs, now you're doing great then. And yes, I did get an iMac. It was a coincidence. I bought a new iMac right when Viral came out, so it worked out perfect. And RAM's pretty cheap, and you can install RAM on an iMac yourself. So I told Apple to ship it to me with like 4. I just said, I want the minimum, because I ripped their RAM out and I went to 32 relatively inexpensively. What other questions do you have for me today? Is Viral really better than using VMware for labs? I wouldn't say that Viral is better than any other option. Like, I'll tell you right now, one of the best options for CCIE preparation that I've seen is the CCIE Lab Builder that's up at the Cisco Learning Network store. There's a $300 option or there's a $1,000 option, and you get, I believe it's what Michael's talking about, the IOU web interface. That thing, it's killer. But for some students, they're like, whoa, I don't have the $300 right now, or I don't have the $1,000 right now. So there's no best method for prep. You know, it's like, I have a kick-ass iMac right now, so Viral was great for me. Because, you know, I've got the kick-ass Mac. I can get as many devices as I would possibly need to test something running beautifully. So it was the great option. Other guys are going to tell you, that GNS3 with the stolen IOU is for them. That's great. I don't want to steal anything, and I didn't want to jump through all the hoops that it takes to get that working. So for me, that's garbage. I wouldn't even consider it. But for someone else, I don't blame them. I mean, if they want to go that route, go that route. It's fine with me. So if you have a practice lab thing you're about to launch into, and you want my opinion, my honest opinion, just post it in the study group, and I will give you my honest opinion. I had someone ask me, can I use Packet Tracer for my CCIE prep? And I said to them, I'm very honest, I said, number one, are you a Network Academy student? They said no. I said, okay, well, you're stealing Packet Tracer. If you're okay with theft, that's fine. And then I said, number two, I wouldn't use Packet Tracer for CCIE prep. And they said, why? And I said, because it's not actual images. And you're always in the back of your mind going to wonder, is this simulation broken, or am I just doing it wrong? So I don't like simulations for high-level cert prep, because the simulation could easily be miscoded and not producing the output that you would expect. What other questions? Were these study recommendations that I went through? Excuse me, not study recommendations. Were these strategies for the config section that I discussed with you? Is that helpful information? Awesome. Yeah, I didn't make this list lightly. This list, following the strategies on this list, is why I passed. I can't make it any more clear than that. I wasn't doing all of these things in previous attempts, and that's why I was failing the lab exam. Once I really got rock solid with my strategy, my study methodology, then obviously I passed. And like I said, it was a pretty remarkable pass situation because I had an hour left. I couldn't believe it. The other thing, I'll tell you this, that I couldn't believe was I walked up to Howard and he said, you just passed, didn't you? Because I had this big shit-eating grin on my face. And he said, you just passed. And I said, I sure did. And I said, and let me tell you something else. I could pass another exam right now. I said, give me another one. I'll pass 2 different labs back to back. Now, what was amazing about my feeling that way was I was always struggling in the afternoon because I was mentally, physically, emotionally exhausted. But the day I passed using rock solid strategies and you know, just I was ready and my study strategies had been locked in. I wasn't I wasn't tired at all. I could have, I swear, passed a second lab that he gave me. I could have gone back to back, 16 hours, and would have passed 2 in a row. And Howard said, if I could give you another lab, that'd be a really fun challenge, but they don't let me do that. So it was pretty funny. Can you reshare the doc? Yep, we'll make sure that this gets out to you. Rohan asks, is there a CCIE study plan in development? I would stop Katie from putting out some kind of, this is your study plan document, because that is extremely dangerous. This is unlike the CCNA or the CCNP, where it's pretty cut and dry what you would have to do to be ready. Because this is an 8-hour practical exam, there is no one-size-fits-all. We can give you suggestions, but it's... Let me give you an example. Someone sitting in this study group right now needs only 100 hours of practice and they might be ready. Someone else sitting in this group right now might need 1,200 hours of practice. You see? So there is tremendous variety when it comes to prepping for this exam. From 100 hours of practice to 1,200 hours of practice. It really is that variable. What do you think to sidetrack to CCDP and use that also as a nice baseline for the lab? I would caution you, if you're really serious about CCIE, I would caution you about sidetracking to other certs. The only ones I would consider if I were you would be those that are indeed in your exam. For instance, if you wanted to sidetrack to CCNA security, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that because most of that stuff is in your route switch exam. But if you sidetrack to something like a CCDP, almost none of that is in your lab, and that's dangerous. I don't want you sidetracking to stuff that doesn't track to this. Nathan says, I've heard that the do's and don'ts are extremely vague. Like they say, don't change standard features. No, they're not vague. They are not vague. Nope. Yeah, I don't know who told you that, but that's not correct. They say, do not use static routes unless the task tells you you can. Do not add IP addressing to this scenario unless the task tells you you can. Do not change any IP addressing on the diagram. So they are black and white statements. Nathan says, like MTU, they're not going to mention something like that. You can, on the nitpicky stuff, you can do whatever it takes to get the task done. Yeah, the do's and don'ts are going to be clear, concise, and they won't be like super nitpicky. Like, you know, don't change MTU. That's too nitpicky. The do's and don'ts are hitting the things that students have done in the past to try and circumvent the process. You know, like, I'm not configuring RIP. RIP sucks. I'm going to put in static routes. Well, sure enough, they had to make a rule against static routes. All right. Any other questions before we wrap up? I'm so glad to know that this was helpful for you. So Rohan asks, did you ever use real equipment on labs when studying? Absolutely. Absolutely I did. So what I did was I used, oh my gosh, what the heck did I use? Oh, I remember what I used. So I had like 4 home routers, and then I had GNS3, just routers, that I would use if there was a problem accessing my home equipment. And then I would rent racks for switching experience, and I would rent rack time for full practice labs. So I did a mix of my own equipment, GNS3, and actual hardware. All right, everybody. Any last questions? Don't be shy. By the way, I'll do more of these if you would like. So just let Katie know or post in the group that we want more of these sessions with you, Anthony, and I would be glad to do that. If they're not of tremendous benefit to you, then, you know, I don't want to waste your time or my time. But if these are beneficial to you, I would be happy to do more. How much have you won in poker this year? That is a question that I cannot disclose because someone might be with the IRS here in this room.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony, for this session. I think it was super helpful, and I'm going to be out next week, so we'll go ahead and skip that, and then you guys can definitely post in the study group if you want to do another session or you want to do a targeted CCIE session as well.
Very cool. I will be available, so not next week, the week after when you're back. That's great for me.
Perfect. Awesome.
And one more question I want to answer that came in. It's, do you need gig-y switches? No, you don't. That's another great thing, is that these technologies, most of these technologies can be practiced on very, very inexpensive gear. So that is totally an option for you. You get routers and switches that people are throwing away, and you can practice a lot of what you need to practice. So that's another great way to go. All right, thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be posting the recording of this as well as the document that Anthony was just holding up and went over today in the study group.
I will email that to you right now before I forget, Katie.
Thank you. Perfect. Have a great day, all.
All righty.